Hello, and welcome to Wise Up with OpenWater, your regular dose of wisdom from the OpenWater community. I'm your host, Ken Pasternak. I'm an OpenWater founding member as well as a contributor. And I'm really excited today to be speaking with Karl Stewart. Karl has had a varied and adventurous career spanning from financial services to the arts, a life as an HR professional, and now as a leadership coach. His varied background and master's degree in organizational psychology have combined to equip him with a deep understanding of human dynamics in the workplace. Not only that, but each of his experiences has shaped him into the multidimensional and wise person he is today. He puts this experience to work, surfacing the diversity and uniqueness in each of his leadership clients, which enables them to operate with distinct vision, voice, and agency. Welcome, Karl. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today.
I'm excited to be here. We already had a good riff before this, so excited to continue the conversation.
Yes, me too. And we did. And I'm fascinated to get into some of the topics we covered. As I mentioned in my intro, you've got a fascinating background. I might even say it's pretty unconventional, but it seems like it serves you well. And I'd love to start with maybe a little bit about you. Who is Karl Stewart?
Sure, it is a little different. Growing up in Jamaica was an experience that taught me how to deal with mosquitoes and lizards that change color on walls and surprise you in interesting ways. And then to come to America when I was 15 and experience a completely different culture. In fact, I chose my undergrad because it reminded me of the terrain of Jamaica, lots of hills, but a completely different demographic of human beings that I got to spend time with and be fascinated about how they moved and talked and enjoyed the culture. And that has always allowed me to feel a little bit of a chameleon vibe in whatever environment I'm in, and to really help people identify what it is that makes them distinct.
That's great. Very perspective building. Talk a little bit more about those transitions that you made in your life. I mean, I was really inspired that you've taken inspiration from the arts, from dance, from music, from mathematics, from all these different disciplines that for some people would be silos, and for you, they seem to be kind of, all relevant inputs.
Yeah, it started again in Jamaica, climbing the guava tree and watching the sunset as my entertainment. And then reggae, calypso, then coming here and pop music. So I've always had to translate between different things. So it's never felt unusual or strange to bop around and do different. My brother, for whatever reason, same background, fell in love with computer science very early and is a computer engineer and has continued to do it. So his entire 50 plus year experience has been computers are cool. For whatever reason, going to a liberal arts school, always wanting to be valedictorian and ace everything that's put in front of me, I've always continued that fascination with what's that? What's that?
Mm,
And what's that? And
mm,
that's just how my brain is designed.
mhm.
Mathematics and philosophy and theater, all for whatever reason in my brain, feel topologically the same. Now
Huh.
we know there's math in music. That's not a
Right.
unusual thing. In fact, the typography of music is very mathematical, scales and notes. But with dance, what I've personally noticed is that we're always dancing. If we're really smart in our emotional intelligence with another human being, we notice their body movement. We notice when they frown. We notice when they hunch over. We notice when their voice goes quiet. And the same thing with acting. Again, in an acting scene, you're paying really close attention. So for me, for whatever reason, and I don't know if there's a rational way to think about it, it's just that my brain automatically has that right and left going at the same time. And because I was brought up in an interdisciplinary school, I just always felt, yeah, of course you do math, music, dance, theater. It all makes sense.
Wow, that's really great. I love that idea of almost like The word proprioception came to mind. You just kind of, you're not just listening to somebody, you're seeing them, you're feeling them, you're understanding where they're coming from all these different, I mean, inputs that we have as human beings, but we may not always use in professional or business context because maybe it's been trained out of us. I don't know. What do you
Yeah, and maybe you had mentioned this, that maybe the younger folks are starting to integrate that intelligence in a way, maybe spurred on by AI. There's this idea that you know a little bit of everything.
think? Yeah. And then you put that to work. So that reminds me of a topic we covered yesterday when we first talked, which was this idea of positive intelligence and using that as a framework for the work that you're doing now. Maybe this is a good transition into positive intelligence. Talk a little bit about what that is, why you find it useful, and how you use it.
Perfect segue, because positive intelligence did bring together almost everything
Hmm.
that I've learned, which is kind of cool. It starts with the idea that our amygdala drives a lot of our reptilian brain, our old brain, the part
Yeah.
that does fight, flight, freeze, fawn is another way of dealing with emergencies and disruption and change. Every human being, hopefully, has a functioning amygdala that is our first response to change or data that comes at us. We're deciding, especially from what we call the judge saboteur, which is the inner part of us that judges something as good or bad.
Mm.
And so, in a split second, we need to make and think fast and slow is probably a good way of thinking about more contemporary thinking around this, is that we have to make split decisions about whether or not we're safe or unsafe. Once we've made a decision that we're safe, turn down amygdala, then we can move on to our prefrontal cortex. So, what we call Sage in positive intelligence is using empathy, exploration of different perspectives on the same scene, as long as it's safe, taking in our core values, maybe the core values of the other person in the organization we're working with. Then we innovate and come up with ideas about solutions. So it's based on the first three, including empathy. And then we move into an activate. This is where our project managers and our math majors come in, and they make specific tasks, put them in a calendar, and assign a certain amount of time and resources to each of the actions that we're going to do. I always used to joke when I was in corporate that we should start every meeting with 1 or 2 minutes of peace and quiet. Everybody taking a nice, easy breath. And Microsoft did some great work, and it actually showed your brain on back-to-back meetings, and the brain's activity was going red, 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 red.
Mm.
And anybody who took a small break in between their meetings, say a 5-minute break, for example, it would drift more into what they colorized as blue. It allowed their brain to reset so that your brain could be optimized in the way that it works in the next meeting. Turns out positive intelligence calls that PQ reps, or positive intelligence reps,
Mm.
which is taking 10 seconds or 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever amount of time you have in your quote unquote busy day, something we can deblur later, is taking those 2 to 3 minutes, taking 10 seconds every once in a while, even doing it as we're doing this recording, and focusing on any of our five senses: touch, smell, taste, sound, breath. And that resets the brain. It turns out it helps optimize. Rest is one of those powerful things that, especially for the brain, but also for muscles, our athletes have always known this. Music without rest is noise. So rest is right, day and night.
Yeah.
Even the earth takes a break and does
Mhm.
winter from time to time in the north and the south of the planet. So when we optimize our brain functioning, one of the things we do is focus on moments of rest. So that's one principle. The second principle is the amygdala is helpful to tell us whether or not we're in danger. After that, turn it down,
Mm.
let it rest. So we call that our saboteur. It's just the old, more expensive part of the brain. A higher functioning part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. So we call that sage. And those are those five superpowers of explore, empathy, navigate, innovate, and activate. Clear, laser focused actions. So think cutting with a sword, sharpening the saw, how to have effective conversations. That's what we're doing in that activate section. So it ties together everything. Innovate is nothing more than improv. It's the yes and game.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Navigate is nothing more than core values. So that's that philosophy work that we did. Activate is nothing more than mathematics. So it's all in there, which I think is so beautiful. And it's allowed me to, in a very simple and easy way that makes easy psychology today kind of pop psychology vibe with leaders who might be from varying different disciplines and might not want to do anything woo-woo. What positive intelligence did was turn it into a white paper with research and data behind it that makes it much more easy for people to access.
Give it structure. Yeah, as you were talking just now about those five dimensions of the sage, I felt an aha moment coming on. I'm like, I
Say more,
think, I
tell
think,
me.
well, I'm just like, okay, okay, all this stuff that I've learned, all these things that come into my brain and my life over the years actually could add up to something. And they do have a role, right? And the emotional does have a role, the spiritual has a role, the logical has a role, all these things. And I'm wondering, this must happen to you a lot when you're working with your clients. What does that aha moment look like? How do people begin to respond when they see that they can tap into this stuff?
You're giving me chills. Because, yes, what you're hearkening is that every human being is connected to ancestral wisdom or an intelligence, right? Our DNA, our cells. If you think about our species crawling out of the ooze and then evolving to wherever we are in 2025, are we evolved? That we hold in our cells the history of everything that we've learned past tense. And so when I sit with somebody, it's about evoking and bringing out that intelligence. It's bringing out your inner wisdom. The client has more data
Hmm.
about the situation that they're in than I do.
Yeah,
Consultants might go in and say, oh, no, 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 I've seen this 1,000 times. I know exactly what you need to do. Do you? So in coaching, what we do is we say, you have the intelligence, you have the wisdom. Everything that happened before this moment helped create this being in front of me. And so, in a way, as a coach, I am absorbing the intelligence and wisdom of my clients. In a lot of ways, when I switch the paradigm and go, oh, they're sharing their wisdom with me, I'm just drawing it out. I don't have to work as hard, but B, they start to develop this agency and sense of intrinsic motivation to go at their desire, which I could never have manufactured or inserted into them.
that's super cool. That's very inspiring. And I cannot help but think a little bit about open water and the idea behind open water, right? And this collective wisdom that we're bringing together and tapping for the purpose of who knows what, all kinds of things. Um, when we spoke yesterday, you shared this metaphor from Greek mythology that I thought was fascinating. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how you see open water's role possibly going forward?
Yeah, there are a couple of Greek things that, again, see history, philosophy, all works together. So I kept thinking about Odysseus and his mentor, Athena, and this idea that we've always had these older, wiser women who tell leaders information that they could never have divined on their own. I said that on purpose. And it shapes the history of that leader. And the other one that we talked about was the very wise temple that Apollo created and the priestess that leaders from all over the world came to would notice that they were able to make better decisions, better executive decisions about their country, about their lives, by meeting with this person who used to be, in general, over 50, usually a woman. And there's a lot of debate about whether or not she was sniffing ethylene gas from our planet because she was on a fissure in the earth. The temple just happened to be built on that, and chewed leaves of questionable origin. So who knows? She tended to answer in riddles. might be an impact of that Dionysian experience, but we've always had the wiser, the elder, that people went to for thoughts, ideas, suggestions about how to move forward. So we've been fueled by that. The elders in the African American culture, the African wise elders on the continent of Africa, we have it in all cultures if we look back. And for whatever reason, in 2025, we've started in some way to diminish that. And we see it in what we call ageism, for example.
Mm.
I contend, especially for us in OpenWater, is that we can start turning down the volume on that for ourselves and start tapping into our ancestral history of we're really smart. We've had 50 decades. I was just talking with somebody this morning and she said, Karl, 9/11, when it happened, all of us older almost remember where we were and how we processed this really powerful experience, this historical moment. And it shaped our lives. It
Hmm.
shaped how we moved, how we thought, how we responded to each other. I remember being in New York City and everybody was so kind and thoughtful to each other in New York City. And she mentioned that she'd done a session for some of the folks at her organization, and she was noticing that some of them were 3 or 4 or younger,
Huh.
not even born when 9/11 happened. And so when you think about wisdom, it's that we've gone through, we've experienced life-changing things that if you were younger, you just didn't, you weren't on a planet.
Hmm.
You have no recollection, no visceral. And I do believe that these experiences shape us and form the intelligence that we share. And we've done lots of studies now, and it shows that if you have generations, plural, within an organization, the organization makes better decisions. So I think OpenWater is spectacularly poised.
Mm.
As you mentioned, a collection of wisdom that other organizations can tap in to amplify their performance against their KPIs. I think it's really that simple. And then how we do that, to your point, the UX UI of it is going to be fascinating and fun to play with. But there's a lot of scientific basis that what we're providing is a value add. Some people throw capital at something. Others can now use OpenWater to throw wisdom at the same challenge.
That's really cool. I mean, you mentioned capital. Capital obviously is currency, right? Technology these days, computing power is currency, but wisdom is also currency. And maybe it's the oldest currency there is. I mean, you talk about ancestral intelligence and what it, and being resident in our cells and the value of the elders going all the way back to the Oracle of Delphi, who's sitting there high on the earth's gases and spewing out wisdom. But that ancestral intelligence of another form of AI that functions actually not all that differently from the computational power driven AI has a much longer centuries, millennia old history. This other concept that you just mentioned, ageism, probably has a much shorter history, but it's very clear and present today. And I don't want to go necessarily negative on this conversation because ageism is a real thing and a lot of us face it. And, you and I've got gray in our beards and people probably look at us a little differently. Yeah, celebrate that. The question I have for you is you mentioned this idea of internal ageism, and I think that's maybe one frontier that we possibly could wage a good little battle on. Talk a little bit about that internal ageism and what the perspective you shared about that is.
It's very interesting. And once somebody pointed out, it's like saying red cars, and obviously it's red cars or elephant. And now all you can think about is elephant. So once somebody mentioned the concept to me, I started investigating, and there's so many aspects to it. So for example, a lot of people will only put 10 years of experience on their resume to signal question mark, or take the gray out,
Mm.
or they will somehow say, well, I'm going to not overprice myself for the
Ah.
market.
Mm.
Or they might say, well, I guess I need to learn all the latest things. as if there is some sort of ideal worker that we need to be, and we're all measured against. And I've noticed a lot of people measuring themselves in their distinctness. What is it that I uniquely bring as a result of, as a function of being older? Instead, it's how do I form factor myself
Mm.
into what I think the market needs? It's really almost a subtle thing and can seem almost insignificant. But when I work with older folks, I go, but what do you bring that's unique? Oh, you've done this and this and this and this, and you're a parent, and you're taking care of your elder parents who are wrapping it up. I love what Ron, and I'm going to mispronounce his name, so I'm not going to say it, but the Wall Street Journal did an amazing article on the pre-mortem.
Hmm.
And this gentleman, and he's a billionaire investor, so this is not small potatoes. He spends every 2 or 3 years, he spends time looking back at his entire life. And this man has started lots of different businesses over time. And he's passed that tradition on to all of his workers. And it's this pre-mortem, this reflection on me at the end of my life, looking back at this moment in time and thinking to myself, what is most important? It's a kind of thing that older folks do much more effectively because it's right there in front of us, this idea of death. And we might wrap up at some point in time. Some people do all sorts of interesting things. We know about the Red Corvette, we know about the second marriage. Some people are now being proactive in calling it their second chapter.
Hmm.
And I think this idea of designing that remaining years of our lives, again, it just shapes the neurons in our brain to fire in a slightly different way than when we were in our 20s, when we thought, I could conquer the world, I could do everything. At this point, we go, I have limited time left, and I want it to matter. And I cannot think of a single person over 50 that I haven't talked to that's not front and center for them. In the limited time I have left, what is it that I really want to leave on this planet? Leave as my wisdom. And that just shapes the lens, almost like an Instagram filter. It shapes the lens with which we look at things. I think that's really important for everybody to be thinking about. But in your 20s, are you going to dwell there very long? It's not going to be a large percentage of your brain functioning. So we bring that, I think, to
Mm.
organizations.
That's fantastic. This idea, again, tapping into that sage and saying, how, how do I navigate this? Or what is the inspiration? Or how do I innovate? How do I say yes and to? I love that idea of not trying to fit into existing modes of thinking. It's so hard, right? When somebody's looking for a job, filling out a resume, going on LinkedIn, whatever, looking for the buzzwords. Perhaps having Chat GPT do some writing for us. I mean, all of those things are realities and they are great tools. And yet, if we look at that and then think about, am I trying too hard to fit into a box that I don't fit into? Maybe it's challenging, right? Because you may be closing off some opportunities, but maybe those aren't the right opportunities.
I love using Chat GPT. I use Gemini, but I
Okay.
love using it. And what's brilliant about large language models is you put garbage in, you get garbage out.
Right.
It's really that simple. It's
Yeah.
math.
Right.
So it's the mindset with which you put in the prompt. So if you put
Mm.
in the prompt, hey, AI, leveraging my decades of experience, how might I position myself to serve this organization's purpose, vision, and mission? You will get completely different data than, hey, AI, I'm really ashamed of the fact that I'm over 50. How do I disguise and spin a web that makes that go away so I seem like the ideal person for this job? That's making the AI a tool in reinforcing your internal ageism
Mm,
and saying, please make me smaller than I am.
mm,
And we know nature doesn't like when you put a tree in a small potting area or not give it the nutrition and input that it needs. It just doesn't work out that well. So it's almost as if you've conspired to not show up with the power and energy, vitality, the talent that you do have. And we notice the same thing happens around internal racism or internal misogyny. It all works in the same way, is that you're trying to force and pretzel yourself
mhm,
into a form that you're not even native to.
mm,
And so you're just not going to perform as well, which is then going to reinforce the idea, well, I guess older workers don't work out. We have the potential to come up with a lot of new paradigms. So, for example, we might incorporate as a feature, not a flaw, that an older person needs more rest
mm.
or needs, right? It might take us less hours to do some of the things that we need in that role. So maybe this person does work 20 hours and has enough time to attend graduations and take care of the elderly parents and work remotely from time to time and be a snowbird. These might all be features. You might not want to have everybody geographically in the same location for safety's sake. We don't put certain leaders on planes at the same time for that reason.
Yeah.
So again, I think a lot of these things that we think of as deficits or negatives are actually features and positives if we just shift the way that we look at them, just shift the perspective.
Mm. I love that. I love the contrasting examples of, using the AI engine and the prompts that you give it. That was really helpful. And I also kind of tied that back to the idea of dance at the very beginning, right? What kind of dance are you going to perform? Is it going to be a box step that's really clinical and straightforward? Or are you going to be free? Are you going to be expressive? Are you going to lean into this things that make you, go? I think that's some sage, to use a familiar word, advice. I really appreciate that. We've got limited time left here. I wanted to just kind of see if there are any like kind of wrap up thoughts you might have for our audiences, kind of two or three bullets of advice that you want to make sure you leave our listeners with.
Yeah, it's really about design.
Okay.
I don't know how I landed there, but the design idea is designing as so anybody over 50 is designing your life.
Mm,
I always encourage people start from a blank page for the individual over 50. Sit down and write down what's the ideal that I want. Then go look at the guardrails of what is out there, who has the appetite to hire older workers and tap into our wisdom, as opposed to starting with what is out there and then trying to fit yourself in. And then for organizations, I think the big one is to think about as simple as sidewalks, the design of sidewalks. Before we wanted to make sure that somebody pushing themselves along in a wheelchair could get up on a sidewalk by themselves, it was a little rough for people with grocery carts and cycling, which you shouldn't be on the sidewalk, but you get it, right? Like by divoting that space in the concrete of the sidewalk, you opened up the trajectory of so many other folks who didn't even know that they needed that or wanted that. They were able to navigate the grocery cart off the sidewalk without the lip. That also now saves us concrete. It actually has a P&L basis. And if people and organizations started thinking a little bit more innovatively, if we apply those top three SAGE pieces, we might actually end up with a better all-around situation, win, win, win for all, if we started thinking outside the box. So those are the 2 points, I think, that might be good summaries.
yeah, that's really terrific. Very inspiring. This whole conversation has been super inspiring. And I want to make sure that for, perhaps as a reward or as a trade-off for the great energy and time and interest that you've given us here today, what can the open water community do for you, Carl?
Wow. Yeah, I really want us to keep this conversation. We're starting masterminds. So
Hmm.
for those who might be interested in jumping in to the community, we're starting masterminds that surround people in a love seat with the wisdom of other colleagues here in the OpenWater system. So I really am excited to dive into that. We're going to start that in a couple of weeks. And what else? I think it's mostly redefine what wisdom means. Just let's redefine it together. Let's make it a collaborative yes and game that we play together. And it's going to be for the betterment not only of individuals and organizations, but for our planet, I think. We're leaving a lot of resources unused.
That's great.
That's what I got.
Well, it's a lot. It's a lot, Carl, and I'm hopeful. I'm certainly looking forward to doing some of those sessions with you and having more interactions with you. Hope the rest of the community is. How can listeners reach you if they'd like to follow up?
Yes, I am work well groups. So my mission is that we all work well together. And so it's workwellgroups.com.
Excellent. All right, we'll look up Karl Stewart on workwellgroups.com. Look for him at Open Water events in the New York area live and also virtually just about anywhere. Karl, it's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to catching up with you in person one of these days.
I would love that.
Thanks so much.